Welcome to Ask Andrew, where each week I answer a film-related question submitted by you, our BMFI viewers. This week's question: what is neorealism? Well, neorealism, or as it is sometimes called Italian neorealism, is a movement that originated in Italy in the years immediately following World War II. Um, the as genre isn't really the right word. The movement, the style, is very much sort of connected to the particular cultural, historical, and industrial circumstances of Italy in the years immediately after World War II, but its influence expands far beyond that place and that period. And I think most people would say neorealism is specifically linked to that moment in Italian cinema, but elements of it certainly span far and wide for decades beyond that period. In the years following World War II, Italy, still wanted to make movies and had actually a pretty thriving film culture that was just a film culture that was limited in a few ways. One, it obviously wanted to distinguish itself from the film industry or the film culture that was in place during Mussolini's tenure in charge of that country. And it wanted to look different, feel different, have a different worldview, have a different message. And that sort of impulse, that creative or political or thematic impulse, was sort of married to the very real world limitations of filming, of making films in a country that had just been on the losing side of World War. And so the filmmakers in Italy at that time, people like Vittorio De Sica and Roberto Rossellini, Vincente Minnelli, really saw an opportunity to kind of step away from the sort of glitz and glamour and polish and formality and sort of elaborate design of Italian films in the years previous. The movies were referred to within Italy anyway as the white telephone films, because they depicted such a well-to-do and elaborate and stylized lifestyle that it seemed that there was always a sort of big, vibrant, obvious white telephone in whatever room or whatever place the movie was set. And that was certainly something that would not be found, or nor would anything like it be found in the neorealist films. The sort of prototypical neorealist film is Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves from 1948. And in that movie, we see really the sort of core elements of the neorealist style. One is obviously thematic. It is showing the hardships of people living in Italy in the years immediately after World War II and after after Mussolini is gone. And you see, depicted in that film, you see problems with housing, with resources, with money, with employment, with the way the government is operating, all sorts of social ills. And you see a story that is sort of small in scope, but big in emotion, big in drama, big in stakes for the characters that are being depicted, and that is frankly very moving. Part of what makes it so moving are the performances, But one of the hallmarks of neorealist filmmaking is the use of, amateur or part-time actors. That was certainly the case for Bicycle Thieves, and across the films made in Italy during that time. I wouldn't go so far as to say there were no professional actors in them, but the casts were largely made up of, people new to acting or people who were amateur performers. So that's one of the sort of stylistic hallmarks. You also have location shooting, not because of any great technological advance that made it more feasible in post-war Italy than in Hollywood, but out of necessity, out of a limitation of resources, out of an inability to build a sort of, a war-torn neighborhood on a studio lot. You actually went to film in a war-torn neighborhood or a run-down apartment building or a government office, et cetera, et cetera. You really have the sort of, in neorealism, the sort of, gritty, I won't say amateurish filmmaking, because it's not amateurish. It's very skilled filmmaking, but it's filmmaking that involves amateur actors, that involves limited resources, that involves, in a way, sort of small, quiet storytelling that has big emotion, big themes, and big, at least, potential for connecting with audiences. And while in my experience people tend to identify a movie as neorealist if it's made in Italy during that time, the late 40s and into the 50s, lots of people can identify lots of influences of that movement on cinemas in other places. You see it in Hollywood in the 1950s, certainly. You see it in a movie like On the Waterfront, for example, that has a lot of location shooting, that is a story about working class people, that depicts the real places where they work, shot in the real places where they work, that has, at least as extras in the background, people who aren't professional actors. And it's a movie about something. It's a social problem film. So in the sort of, location shot, gritty, social issue or social problem films in Hollywood in the 1950s and beyond, you can see the influence of neorealism. You can also see the influence of neorealism in Britain, in the so-called kitchen sink films, the largely domestic dramas that for the first time in that film industry really focused on the challenges and problems facing working class people in Great Britain. There's clearly a neorealist influence there. And I would also say that though less direct perhaps, or less encompassing, there's a bit of a neorealist influence in the French New Wave as well. Those filmmakers working in France in the late 50s and early 60s were certainly influenced by the location shooting, by the almost guerrilla filmmaking that was required by shooting on a shoestring, and by capturing, because you are shooting on real locations and you haven't closed down the street or shut down the shop or whatever, capturing elements of the real life going on around where the film is being shot. That's definitely something that neorealist films have, and something that makes its way into those French New Wave films, particularly the early ones, and others as well. So that's a little bit, at least, about what neorealism is. And when someone says that a film reminded them of a neorealist film or was shot in a neorealist style, that gives you some idea of what they mean. So I hope I answered that question satisfactorily. Not to say that there isn't a lot more to say on the topic, because there is. I'm just not going to do it here. But if you have a film-related question you would like to hear at least some of my thoughts on, please visit brynmarfilm.org. Go to the Film Studies Online section and find the Ask Andrew form. Who knows? Next time I could be answering a question you sent in.